The well spacing calculator is launched by selecting the Calculate Well Spacing option under the Engineering item on Transform's main menu bar along the top of the application. The well spacing calculator is a utility to compute distances between and among wellbores. These distances are three-dimensional in that full X, Y, Z coordinates along wellbores are used. First, a few critical definitions. We define a child wellbore as the source well to which distances are referenced and assigned. A parent wellbore to a child wellbore is one which is closest to a particular location along the child wellbore. A child well may have more than one parent well, especially if the child well is deviated or horizontal. For example, the trajectory of a horizontal well, which may well be over 10,000 feet long, may pass close to several vertical parent wells. User controls on these distance calculations, as will be discussed in the well spacing setup video, permit the following. The distance calculations to be made over the entire wellbore or confined to a wellbore zone. For example, we only want those distances over the horizontal lateral length. In either of these options, a specified number of sample points are defined over the portion of the wellbore of interest. When looking for the nearest parent well at any sample point, the search may be either spherical or it may be cylindrical, where we limit the vertical search distance. Maximum distances are used to filter candidate parent wells. Candidate parent wells may be based on either current spacing or filtered to spacings that occurred at specific time intervals relative to some reference date in the child wellbore. Typically, reference dates include spud date, completion date, first production date, and so forth. Distances may also be filtered to the projection angle from the sample point in the child wellbore to the sample points in the parent well. Examples of the utility of this option are given in the usage tips and examples video. Results from the distance calculations may be saved as either well logs or as wellbore scalars. There are 4 tabs within the calculator user interface. The first is the well spacing setup, which provides wellbore selection for child wells, selection for candidate parent wells, and distance, date, and angle filtering. The second tab is the Spacing Results tab, which provides a table with the spacing solutions, namely the spacing distance scalars, other useful scalars, and the ability to view the distances along sample points in log view. The third is the Results map, which provides a pseudo-base map with options to display distance lines from child to parent wellbores and to display distance scalars as bubble maps. Slider bars provide the means to filter distance and scalar values and to filter along date lines. The fourth provides charts such as histograms and cross-plot options for investigating the distributions and relationships of the distance scalars. The Well Spacing Setup tab is where you specify the wellbores for which you want distances calculated. The left table, which is titled Select Child Wells, is where this is done. The right table is for specifying the candidate parent wellbores. All candidate parents are investigated as to which may be closest to the child wellbores. The term closest is dependent on distance maxima, date dependencies, and projection angles. The right side panel is where this parameterization is defined. The tables in this panel are wellbore tables with the standard toolbar and right mouse click options. Well and wellbore lists may be selected using the combo box widget. This is particularly useful if well and wellbore lists have been constructed using other utilities such as well targeting and decline curve analysis. All columns are sortable, including multiple sorting. Columns may also be hidden or made visible to customize what you view. The radio buttons along the base of the tables permit you to compute distances over the entire wellbore or to limit the calculations to defined wellbore zones. This is particularly useful for deviated and horizontal wellbores. Child and candidate parent wellbores may be selected or deselected using the toolbar icons, the plus to select all and the minus to deselect all, or the right mouse options for selecting or deselecting highlighted rows. Wellbores in the currently specified well or wellbore list that do not have the specified wellbore zone are annotated in the Select column with a blue dot. These are not selectable. Now let's look at the parameters available for controlling distance calculations and candidate wellbore pairings for child to parent. The current spacing option considers all selected candidate parent wellbores for each selected child bore. No consideration of timing of the wellbores is given. To include a date dependency, select the date-dependent spacing option. This option requires a reference date, and each child wellbore and candidate parent wellbores are required to have this reference date defined. Wellbores without this date are not selectable in the wellbore tables and will be annotated with the blue dot. Two options for defining date range filtering are available. The first is for all parent wells that have their reference date prior to that of the child reference date, minus or plus a specific number of days, using the before or after radio buttons. The other option allows for a date interval, so many days before the child reference date to so many days after the child reference date. A graphical representation of these options is shown. The upper example considers all candidate parent wells that have a reference date on or prior to 30 days before the child reference date. The middle example is similar except on or prior to 30 days after the child reference date. Finally, the lower example considers candidate parent wells within the date interval of 30 days before to 30 days after the reference date of the child wellbore. It is possible for a child wellbore to be closer to different parent wells along its trajectory. This is particularly the case with deviated or horizontal child wellbores and vertical parent wellbores. The option is given to compute distance scalars, for example, the average well spacing distance, to the potentially many parent wellbores found to be closest along the child wellbore, or the parent wellbore that is closest over the largest number of sample points in the child wellbore. If the interval within the child well is defined by 25 sample points, we'll discuss this in just a moment, and a particular parent well is found to be closest at 15 of these sample points, then it is designated as the primary parent well. If the Use Primary Parent Well Only option is selected, then the other 10 samples, presuming they pass the maximum distance and any projection angle limits, are then recomputed using this primary parent well. The number of samples defines the number of sample points along each child and candidate parent wellbore to which distances are computed. The more sample points, the better the resolution and potentially statistical significance of the distance results, albeit at a greater compute time. Two search options are provided as to how distances are to be considered. One, purely on total three-dimensional distance, and the second, separately on the aerial or the XY distance and the vertical or Z distance. Think of the first option as a spherical search and the second as a cylindrical search in which the vertical distance between the Z coordinates of the sample point in the child wellbore and sample point in candidate parent well must meet the specified limit, and then the distance between the respective XY coordinates is then within the aerial distance limit. If these are met, then the total distance is computed and compared to the minimum distance found thus far for this sample point in the child wellbore. This cylindrical search is a good proxy for considering parent wellbores within the same geologic zone. Of course, this can also be achieved by using the well targeting and creating primary zone wellbore lists. The total distance or spherical option may find parent wellbores much shallower or deeper than the child wellbore, but still within the maximum allowable total distance. Finally, distances may also be filtered according to the projection angle they make between a sample point along the child wellbore and a sample point along a candidate parent wellbore. This angle is defined as plus or minus a specified number of degrees from the normal projection, in other words, 90 degrees. Therefore, a specified filter angle of 10 degrees will filter out any compute distances that have projection angles less than 80 degrees on either side of normal. This is an extremely useful option that is illustrated in the tips and examples section of this video help. Upon selection of one or more child wellbores from the left table, and one or more candidate parent wellbores from the right table, and having set the desired parameters, click on the Compute Spacings button in the lower right. This button will not be enabled if wells have not been selected in each table. After the well spacing distances have been computed, the results are tabulated in the Spacing Results tab, graphically displayed in the Results Map tab, and contained in histograms in the Charts tab. The Spacing Results tab is the first of three which display the results of the well spacing calculations. Per the wellbore selections made and the parameterization specified in the Well Spacing Setup tab, the results of the distance calculations are given in the table of the spacing results. This table has many columns of distance and other related scalars. Note the scroll bar along the bottom of the table. Also, which columns are displayed in the table may be customized using the column selection option, which also allows you to customize the number of decimal places for non-integer numbers, or the plus sign on the far right of the column headers. Each row in the table contains the results for one of the child wellbores for which at least one parent wellbore was found that met the distance criteria. If the option to use all parent wellbores found was selected, then a column with the number of parent wellbores found is given, along with the list of those wellbores in another column. The primary parent wellbore is also provided. The Number Samples column contains the number of sample points along the defined child wellbore for which a distance to a parent wellbore that met the distance and any angle limitations was found. The coverage value is simply the fraction of sample points for which a distance value was valid. For example, if 15 sample points out of a possible 25 had a distance value, then the coverage is 0.6. It is from these sample points for which valid distances were determined that the distance scalars are then computed: the mean or average, median or mid value, minimum and maximum, standard deviation, and coefficient of variation. This last scalar is the ratio of standard deviation to the mean. Large coefficient values are often associated with potentially problematic distance results for the associated child wellbores. The distance scalars are computed and displayed for each of the components of distance, namely the total distance, the aerial or XY component, and the vertical or Z component. Further, the sample point distances found along the child wellbore may be displayed as logs. Simply click on any solution in the table, and the three distance components are shown in the log tracks. The number of values defining the curve corresponds to the number of samples given in the table. Note, there may be gaps in the logs where no distances that met the specified criteria were found. These logs may be saved to the wellbores by pressing the Create Logs button along the bottom right of the panel. Also, some or all of the distance scalars may be saved as wellbore attributes by pressing the Create Attributes button. There are three right mouse menu items for highlighted rows that are specific to this table, and similarly to the results table to be seen in the next tab called Results Map. They are Update the Results Map, Recompute Spacing Results, and Remove Spacing Results. Again, these act only on the row entries that are highlighted. The first sends the list of highlighted solutions to the results map for highlighting in that table and associated display updates. The second is useful, especially when there are many child-parent pairings or one doesn't wish to update all solutions. When changes have been made to the parent settings and only wish them to be applied to the highlighted wellbores. Finally, the third item is useful to remove all bad solutions prior to saving the results to the database or for cleaning up and simplifying the table to acceptable solutions. The Results Map panel provides ways to display the spatial relationships of the well spacing solution values. These include the individual distance lines from child well control points to the nearest parent well control point, meeting any distance and angle criteria. Also, the distance scalars may be displayed as bubble maps. Sliding filters for date and distance are provided as appropriate. By default, the base map shows the distance lines between child and parent wellbores. These are shown in red. The minimum or closest distance for a given child wellbore is shown in green, and the largest or maximum of the distances for the sample points is shown in blue. The distances being displayed may be filtered using the lower slider bar. If a date dependency is included in the well spacing calculation, then the distance lines are also filtered according to the associated child wellbore reference date. The base map may be zoomed by holding down on the control key while dragging with the left mouse button. To unzoom, simply hold down on the control key and left mouse click in the window. Multiple levels of zoom and successive unzooms are permitted. Clicking or highlighting one or more wells in the table will display only those solutions in the base map. This is particularly useful when doing this in conjunction with one or more levels of sorting in the table. Also, there is a right mouse menu item to send the highlighted solutions to the spacing results table and vice versa. Finding similar solutions or potentially problematic solutions is greatly facilitated using this menu item. Simply hit the Escape key, the ESC, while the mouse focus is in the table. Getting mouse focus is ensured by clicking anywhere in the table. The highlighted selections are reset along with the map display. The other two table menu items were covered in the Spacing Results section of this video help. These options allow the two tables to work in concert. The solution scalar values for each of the distance components may be displayed in the base map as bubbles. The relative sizes of the bubbles reflect the corresponding magnitude of the values. The spinner allows the maximum bubble size corresponding to the maximum value to be set. The value in the spinner is in pixels. Again, if the solutions are date dependent, the upper slider bar will filter on the selected date range. It is not necessary to compute new spacing solutions only when the well spacing tab is visible. Commonly, it is very informative to do this from the Results Map tab. Go to the Well Spacing Setup tab, make the desired changes, but go back to the Results Map before recomputing the solutions. Using the Compute Spacings button found along the bottom right of the panel, we'll update all the solutions. By using the right mouse menu item, Recompute Spacing Results for highlighted wellbores, we'll only recompute solutions for those wellbores using these new settings. The base map display will update with any change in solution. The Charts tab provides the ability to perform univariate and bivariate analyses on the distance scalars computed. Histograms for the distance scalars are automatically generated. These are useful for examining the distribution of the values for each scalar, especially before creating any wellbore attributes. These plots may be closed by clicking in the X in the upper right of the plot. New histograms and crossplots may be created by using the options in the upper left of the panel. Then drag and drop from the available attributes list onto the axes of these plots. Upon entering the well spacing calculator, the default settings for the calculations means that for all wells, an attempt is found to find parent wells in all the other wells. This may not be what you're really interested in. To illustrate this, let's accept the defaults and compute the well spacings. Examination of the results table may not be sufficient to understand the implications of this choice. Going to the results map definitely shows highly chaotic patterns in the distance lines. Yes, well spacing distances had been determined, but they may not be what we expected. Returning to the setup panel, let's limit the spacing computations to only the horizontal sections of the wells. Of course, this means that vertical wells will be excluded. Recomputing the distances with this limitation results in a different picture. Again, going back and resetting to a specific producing interval in the vertical wells, which will eliminate the horizontal wells, and recomputing produces an obviously different pattern of results. Careful choice of analysis wells and zone of interest is critical for obtaining meaningful spacing distances. The creation of well lists using the well targeting and decline curve tools can be quite powerful. It is likely, especially in densely drilled areas with a mix of vertical and horizontal wellbores, that the minimum distances computed to the nearest wellbore will be to different parent wells. Here we set the option to use the distances from any candidate parent well from which the minimum distance was found. The results map has been zoomed to a set of wells to illustrate the difference between this all parent wells option and the primary parent well only option. Note that some of the distance lines have jumped the gap in the middle of this cluster of wells. That is because those distances are smaller across the gap than they are to any other wells in the cluster. This means that the center well has more than one parent well to which it is closest along the length of its wellbore. Let's return to the setup panel and select the Use Primary Parent Well Only option. Before recomputing the distance solutions, let's go back to the results map so that we can easily see the changes upon completion of the computation. Those distances across the gap are now gone. Although they were the minimum distances when all candidate parent wells were considered, now these distances are replaced by the distances to the same parent well from which the majority of minimum distances were originally computed. The selection of this option can be critical in getting the right distances for any kind of subsequent analysis. The next example illustrates the impact of the distance search criteria, namely the effect on distance calculations for the spherical or maximum total distance specification versus the cylindrical or separate maximum aerial and vertical distances. For a subset of the horizontal well shown in the base map, let's compute the distance solutions using the maximum total distance option. The maximum total distance is set to 5,000 feet. We are also using only the primary parent well. Sorting the results table on the mean total distance, we see that the distances found are indeed less than 5,000 feet. However, if we sort on the vertical distance component, it shows that some of these parent wells are over 500 feet above or below their corresponding child wells. This most likely means that the child and parent wells are in significantly different reservoir zones. This issue is not obvious by simply looking at the distance lines in the results map, nor when looking at the bubble maps. Examining the results table, we see that the wellbore, Nobles 3126SH, has a parent wellbore, the Nobles 3106BH, where the mean vertical spacing is 679 feet. Returning to the setup panel, we'll now search distances where the maximum aerial distance is set to 5,000 feet. But the maximum vertical distance is limited to within 100 feet. Note the vertical distances now in the table. They are all less than 100 feet. Is there a new parent wellbore for the Nobles 3126SH? Filtering the results table to the Nobles wells, we see that the 3126SH doesn't even appear. This means that with these new search specifications, this wellbore has no parent well. In addition to placing maximum distance criteria on the well spacing calculations, we can control the projection angle the distance vectors make between control points in the child wellbores to the control points in the candidate parent wellbores. The filter by projection angle option permits us to specify an angle fairway off the normal or orthogonal distance vector. Think of this as how many degrees plus or minus off 90 degrees we will allow. First, let's compute a solution with this option turned off. Note the wide angles made for some of the distance lines between wells. These distances meet the maximum distance criteria, but many are nowhere near orthogonal to the wellbore trajectories. Going back and turning on the angle filter option and filtering to plus or minus 10 degrees from normal produces quite different results. Besides the distance metrics, the coverage metric is greatly affected by this option.